Right, so today I want to make a video updating everyone as usual and then get into some other important things. Um, I did come across a big story yesterday that I want to talk about, so give me a few minutes, I'll start talking about that stuff. So, first things first, Canada's up to 78,532 confirmed cases, 5,857 dead. Alberta's up to 6,716 confirmed cases. 1,004 active cases. So again, we continue to tick down on the active cases number. We just had 33 new cases again yesterday. So the thing I wanted to point out is that if you look at the numbers for the past few days, they're even down from the numbers from like a week or two ago, and those numbers were down from the numbers from like the last week of April. So, like I say, not only has the curve has flattened over the last week. If you look from 2 weeks ago, so I keep pointing out, but like I say, we still have Jason Kenney coming out. Oh, we have to go along slowly here, and Doug Ford. Oh, I don't want to risk anything, and all this stupidity. And people talk about, oh, why does it matter so much to you? Why does it matter? Like, does 30% unemployment, is that not a big issue? Does that not deserve to be reiterated? So the thing to point out is that there's no reason that we shouldn't be open already. There's wasn't even a looking back on it. I mean, this is a hindsight's 2020, but we never even should have closed down in the first place. There's several examples to prove that. If someone would have told you at that time, because remember, the people comparing it to the flu when we first went into the lockdowns were viciously ridiculed and mocked. Well, guess what? It turns out that if you're under 60 and you don't have any underlying health conditions, it is the same as the flu. For people under the age of 20, it's actually less, which I've seen several posts about all these parents, these stupid Karens, saying like, is it safe to send my kid back to childcare? Is it safe for them to go back to school? Like, I don't think so. Like, it's less than the flu. I've never heard of a parent in my entire life think about taking their kid out of school or out of daycare during flu season, and we know the numbers are higher for the flu, and there's not much of a difference. It's splitting hairs, but still. So that's the one thing I wanted to point out is that if someone would have told you that we're gonna lock you down and force you to stay home, even though your chances of dying from this are almost exactly the same as the flu, nobody would have went for it. Nobody would have. I mean, the Karens still would have went for it, but that we're talking the 10-20% of the population that because they speak so much and so loudly, they appear to be a higher percent of the population, and the people that are mad and understand that it's all a fraud, it's all a farce. Those people tend to be people that are more scared of making their opinions heard because they'll be ridiculed by the Karens of the world. So that's kind of my point on that. But like I say, I don't see how someone can look at you with a straight face and tell you, yeah, knowing what we know now, we should have locked down in the first place because it makes no sense. The Canadian government, TAM and HADU came out today and said, yeah, we should have closed the borders down sooner. We should have suggested people wear masks sooner. And I want to make one thing clear about the masks. People should not be forced to wear masks because masks do have downsides. They downregulate your immune system, and would be the main one. They make it harder to breathe, all that kind of stuff. So people that think that masks are this magical thing, it's not true. What I've always said with masks is we should suggest people wear them, especially if you have it. But if you don't have it, there's no reason to wear a mask. Especially these people driving around in their cars with masks, wearing masks inside. Like, there's no point. And especially, like I say, if you're someone who's under 60 with no underlying health conditions, which is most people who are in the workforce, um, you don't need to wear a mask because you don't even consider wearing a mask in flu season. So why would you do it now? Um, so that's kind of the points I wanted to bring up, and it's like I point out to them when you talk to these people, they have no idea what they're talking about. These keep it locked down or we're all going to die people, and I don't mean that in a bad way. They're just people that probably watch the CBC all day and still think that it's doomsday, and um, they constantly have to move the goalposts too. Like if you're like I constantly think of, okay, well, what would the news, what would have to come out for me to be proven wrong and to for my beliefs to have been wrong? Well, I mean, for starters, number one would be, borders actually do not work, which nobody thinks that anymore. The death rate would have had to have gone up, not way down. Um, the areas that didn't lock down would have had to have seen a much, not just a little bit. People point out that Sweden, oh, they had a little bit higher than the average. That doesn't matter. Like I say, the average amount of people that have died in Sweden from January through April is almost exactly what they see in the average year. So people thinking that Sweden, because Sweden has a slightly higher death rate or infection rate, means that it didn't work. No, that's not true. It did work. If anything, it worked. The debate is just how much better did it work, and I would say a lot better. But if you want to say just a little bit, then go ahead. But that's the point. So like those are the big things too. Like for people, you can tell that their views are shrouded in reality and in truth, and they've really thought things through. Is if they understand, okay, well, what would things have to look like for my views, my opinions to be wrong? And if you ask the keep it locked down and we're all going to die crowd that question, well, what would they have to say? I mean, they wouldn't say it, but what would they say if they're actually honest? Well, the death rate's much lower. Um, what else would we have to say? Well, the death rate's much lower. The places that have been open for a while, I mean, there's several states, several countries that have been open for more than 2 weeks. I mean, Saskatchewan and BC are already in phase two. We would have to see massive outbreaks, at the very least, a decent outbreak in those areas. Has it happened in any of those areas? I haven't seen any stories of that. So that's why these people are wrong, because the simplest way to find out if people are wrong is, okay, well, what would have to happen what would have to happen for of the opposite of your belief to be true to make you look wrong? Like I say too, the opposite of the people that support opening things up, the opposite of that is the places that have opened up have had big issues. That hasn't happened. So that's pretty safe to assume that the people who want to reopen things are right. And the problem is that the reason why the outbreak was why people say, oh, well, the lockdowns worked because it slowed the spread. No, there's no evidence of that, and I'll get to that. Um, but the other thing to get to is that if the lockdowns worked, well, then why have the places that have been reopened, why have the places that didn't fully close not have massive amounts of outbreak? So anyway, I just wanted to get that point across. This is kind of the big thing I wanted to talk about here. So this is from Alan Tumulty, and I believe he is a scientist, I believe. But he says social distancing is a crock of, you know what? There never was any scientific paper or study conducted to prove it saved anybody from getting an infection. It was invented by a high school student, and then here's the paper that it comes from. And it was came out from the Bush administration, I believe, 2006. And this is, like I say, I always mention this point, but I wanted to bring it up again because it makes sense for this point. Is that you have all these people that whenever you try and debate them on climate change or on anything, they'll be like, oh, where are the studies to back up your views? Where are the studies? But yet there's no studies. There's no studies on social distancing that proves that it works. There's no studies on vaccines. No double-blind placebo-controlled studies on vaccines, but you have all these idiots talking about how people should be forced to have vaccines. Again, the reason why the left always claims that they're big on science is that they just believe it when it agrees with them. They'll turn like another example is that they criticize Rand Paul, who is a doctor, for criticizing who is it, Fauci or one of the big doctors in the states, and questioning them. And he said, "Oh, you're not qualified," even though he's a doctor. Even though he's a doctor. Um, and yet they turn around and bring Greta Thunberg on as a expert on a panel on the virus. Like this is a 17-year-old high school dropout who literally knows nothing. Um, so yeah, that's just where we're at with the left. Is that you're an expert to them if you agree with them. Let's just be honest. The titles and the all that kind of stuff doesn't matter. And this is what I wanted to point out too, is that there's still these people that say, oh, we still need to have social distancing. We still need to have social distancing. Well, this whole problem could have been solved without having to do any stupid social distancing. The solution to the problem was from day one, quarantine the old, quarantine the people that have underlying health conditions, and let everybody else go about their way. And that works. That would have worked better. We now know that the reason why New York had such a big outbreak is that the governor ordered people who turned out to have the virus, and they wouldn't let them get tested, or they knew they were sick and they still made them go into the nursing homes. And I'm guessing stuff like that happened in Canada too. Um, so the reason why this got so bad is because the government screwed thing up from at every step of the way. I'll repeat that. The reason the virus, and this is such a big issue now, is that the government screwed it up from every step of the way. People blaming the people who want to reopen for bringing on the virus. No, you're an idiot. There's no evidence to back that up. And even if there is, the only reason that the virus got so bad is because people implemented policies that are the opposite of the people who wanted to open things up would have done. So that's a stupid argument. But anyway, like I say, social distancing, there's no evidence behind it. It sounds good in theory. It's one of those things that, it sounds good in theory, but again, where's the evidence to back it up? Like, where's the evidence? So, anyway, this is from Yukon Strong. Now, he's responding to something that New Zealand passed, basically giving police sweeping new powers to enter homes without a warrant. I believe Newfoundland did this too. They did something that was kind of draconian like this as well. Um, and it's only a matter of time till this happens in Canada too, because the police and the liberals and the CBC and all these idiots will be like, oh, it's for your own good. We're gonna solve crime. We're gonna prevent the spread. All this kind of crap. And before we know it, they have the power to come into your house whenever they want. You know, you have all these leftists that complain, oh, fascism and the Nazis and all this kind of stuff. Well, imagine if you're opening up the power. What happens if Donald Trump 2.0, the quote unquote fascist, according to the left, gets elected in Canada and then he has this power? What if he starts rounding up, the Jews or the blacks or whatever? But and I know it sounds hyperbolic to anybody with a brain, but the left, a lot of these people on the left actually believe that. They actually think that Trump is this dyed-in-the-wool racist and all this kind of stuff, even though there's no evidence of it. I mean, they call him a Nazi, and his daughter's married to a literal Jew. He literally got awards from like blacks in like the 80s and 90s. So um, that doesn't make any sense, and there's no evidence of it to begin with. Um, but like I say, this is something that should be completely nonpartisan. Everybody should be able to agree with this. Who seriously? I mean, I understand that there's people that are just so stupid that they support this kind of stuff. But what reason do they need this for? Why does the government need this power? It's not for our own good. It opens up a massive door for abuse, and that's the reason why we can't have this. It creates about as slippery of a slope as slippery slopes have ever existed for government overstep and overreach. And like people say, oh no, it'll never happen here, or no, no, no. But the government does this kind of stuff in steps. They never go from being giving you all your freedoms to fascism or communism overnight. That's not how it works. It's step by step by step. It takes years, decades usually. And the problem is that the average person has such a short attention span that they don't even notice this kind of stuff. So this is something that should really scare people. We should be up in our. I mean, we've already lost way too many of our freedoms in Canada, like way too many. Let alone if something like this happens. Which, like I say, if Trudeau stays in power, it's only a matter of time till it happens. Um, so this is from the Babylon Bee, and like I say, they are a parody news outlet. But even though they're parody, a lot of the stuff they say is not all that out of the question. And that they put out this poll. I mean, obviously it's made up, but most of the actual polls are made up as well, or at the very least manipulated. And they say 68 say lockdown shouldn't end until all diseases are eradicated. There's no war, hunger, or suffering. And the point of this being is that the goalpost keep shifting to the point to where eventually we're going to be at this. Like I say, it went from flatten the curve to flatten it a little bit more to, oh, we need a vaccine, we need to prevent against a second wave, all this kind of stuff. Before we know it, it's going to be, oh, we need to wait until there's no cases. And you literally have some of these doctors, and people say, oh, you're just being hyperbolic. I've literally seen doctors calling for lockdowns through next winter. I seen one this is probably an outlier, but one literally called for a lockdown through the winter of 2022. You're telling like that literally wouldn't happen. I think that we literally would have doomsday if that happens. I would bet money on that. Um, But like I say, there's no reason to keep things locked down in the first place, anyways. Um, Reopen things, quarantine the old, allow people if they want to sit at home and cower in fear to do that, but let the rest of us go on with their lives because there's no evidence to support what we're still doing. There's no evidence whatsoever. Um, so the last thing to point out here is this story that came out now. Steve Glynn, who works for Sportsnet, he's not really high up in Sportsnet, I believe, but I think I've seen him before. He basically strongly criticized Trump and Trump supporters, which again is probably 70, 75 million people, um, and a lot of Canadians as well. And they fired Don Cherry for saying something that objectively was, like I say, I don't think it was offensive in any way, shape, or form. And the reason why is that if something is true and offensive, or sorry, and could be perceived as offensive, well, it's just a harsh truth. Like, it's just a harsh truth. And that's the problem with the left is that, and the other thing to point out too is that the left was, one of these big leftists was out there calling Trump obese the other day, or which I don't think he's overweight. Is he obese? No, he's definitely overweight, but is he obese? No, definitely not. Um, but according to them, fat shaming and body shaming is this terrible thing, but yet they're turn around and do it. Like, these people have no principles whatsoever, like none whatsoever. And they need to be called out too because Don Cherry was fired for something a lot less offensive than what this idiot did. So that's something I wanted to point out. I know it's a little bit unrelated to the main stuff that's going on these days, but again, I wanted to point it out because again, I like to say that the left has a bit of a double standard, and here is the seems like millionth example of it. So anyway, I'm gonna leave the video there. If you liked it, make sure to hit that like and subscribe. Check out my PayPal and email, got linked in the description. Again, appreciate any donations, but at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. And last couple things, as always, check me out on Twitter if you haven't already. Again, just got Twitter, and check me out on BitChute if you haven't already as well. All the links in the description, so check me out there.